Hey everyone, this is a really special edition of our Dads with Daughters podcast. Now, you might say, well, this is a podcast, but we're recording it today. We are recording it today so that we have this video to be able to share with all of you within our Fathering Together communities, but we're also going to share this with all of our podcast listeners as well. I'm really excited to have you here with us again today. And for me, I've talked with Jeffrey in the past, but I am really excited because of the work that we are doing in regards to gender equity, the work that he is doing in gender equity, and we're going to talk about some of the amazing things that he is doing. Now, I talked about his first name, but today the person that is joining us today is Jeffery Tobias Halter. Now, if you've never heard of Jeffrey, he's got a huge bio that goes with his name. But basically, when you look at his bio, you're going to see that it says that he is a corporate gender strategist. Now, you might say, what the heck is that? We're going to talk about that. But what that means is that he is a leading expert in engaging men to advance women. Now, as fathers of daughters, we all should be doing that. And definitely, we're going to be talking about how we can do that and how he is doing that after many years in the corporate sector, after having a daughter himself. And I'm really excited to be able to learn more about his story and have him share his story with you. Jeffrey, thanks so much for being here today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
It's my pleasure to have you here. Now, I always start my interviews with an opportunity to delve deeper into you as a father. And I know you've got an adult daughter right now.
Yep.
But I want to turn the clock back in time. So let's go back. We're going to go back about 35 years.
Oh, gosh. Okay.
So we got to think back here. But I want to turn back the clock to that first moment where you found out that you were going to be a father to a daughter. Tell me about that.
Wow, that's funny. I can tell you, I learned I was going to be a father when my wife told me, obviously. I'll just share a quick funny story with you. I was working for a company, and I wasn't real happy in my job. I was calling on grocery stores, and believe it or not, I was representing and selling toilet paper, diapers, and feminine napkins. And it was a job, and it was a great company, but it was something my heart clearly wasn't in. And so I literally came home to tell my wife that, honey, I'm a good salesperson, but I need to go do something else. And she looked at me and smiled and said, well, I'm pregnant and you sell diapers. I think God is trying to tell us something. And so I stayed for another 2 years, and it actually turned out really well. I ended up being recruited away to the Coca-Cola company, where I'd spent 26 years. And so, but that's how I actually found out I was going to be a father. And we did have diapers for both our children that we stockpiled. So that was nice. I found out I was the father of a daughter, in the birthing room when I saw our daughter born. And, I'm sure this happens a lot, it's so emotional. And, I had come from both of my brothers had 5 sons. And so you just kind of get this feeling that, oh, you're probably going to have a son, which would have been wonderful. We had no expectation. And then you realize, oh my gosh, it's a girl. And your life changes. So, so that was the first moment that I found out I was going to be a daughter. And daughters are just different. Daughters are they're just different. I won't say they're better than sons or tougher to raise than sons. They're just different. And I have a son and I have a daughter. I love both my children, and still married after 42 years to the mother of our children. So it's been a great ride.
So you talked about having a daughter and raising a daughter is different. Now, what would you say was the hardest part in raising a daughter?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. It's funny, and people may not believe this, because some people might say the drama or the peer pressure or whatnot. Um, we were blessed with wonderful children. Our daughter, up until probably a 15 or 16, was just an angel. Listened, did her homework. Our son was exactly the same way. I give all the credit to my wife. I was a sales guy. I was gone. So I don't take a lot of credit for the amazing children that we raised. And then you get into the challenges. I think the hardest part is knowing that they've got to find out things for themselves. And, sadly, you learn that the hard lessons in life are the hard lessons in life. But you know what? They're also the ones you remember most. And so, when you see your daughter struggling in either relationships, or maybe those first couple jobs, or disagreeing with her best friend over something that's not of any consequence. It's just, sitting on the bed and talking to her about what's going on in her life. And this is actually something that I did because about probably 10 years into my sales career at Coke, I would transition into sales and training. And I would become a certified trainer. And I did a lot of Myers-Briggs, a lot of holistic work, what some listeners might call woo-woo work, where you journal and you reflect. And I actually wrote a letter to my daughter and my son on their 16th birthday, on their 18th birthday, and when they graduated from college. And it just causes you to reflect. And these gifts to them were some of the most valuable things that they still have and they still carry around. And so when I turned 60, I said, I want you to write me a letter. And of course they hated it. And they're two of my most cherished possessions. So it seems a little hokey, but I want to tell you, particularly for men, it's, I think, so much easier to write things down and hand them, particularly to your daughter, than maybe trying to explain them. So hopefully that works for some of your listeners.
No, I think that's great, and I agree that I think that the teenage years can be challenging. I mean, I've got a preteen and a teenager right now, and they're both daughters, and definitely you just have to strap on, right, and be ready for what happens, and just be. And hopefully at that point, you've built a strong relationship through their young years to be able to provide them with the stability in their teenage years and beyond as well. Now, your daughter is in her 30s right now, and I know that I'm sure that as she was growing up, you probably had some fears about her growing up in society today. What would you say were your biggest fears for your daughter as she was growing up?
Yeah, you always worry about their safety. You just driving and peer pressure and all of the things that come along with that. And so I would say those are probably the biggest ones. What was interesting, so my daughter when she went to grad school, she was obviously in her 20s, but she moved down to Orlando to go to University of Central Florida. And she was paying much of her own way. I helped her on tuition, but I said, I want you to have some equity in this. And so she lived, her housing was kind of in maybe a little sketchy area, right? And there wasn't a night that I didn't go to bed. I mean, her door, she had a male roommate. But, you could have kicked this in, without even a hard kick. And so, and it became a running joke with us. And so every day she lived in Orlando, she would have to text me. And all she would have to text me is, I am okay. And getting that in the morning, whether it was 10:30 or 7:30 or 12:30, depending on her hours and when she slept. It was a connection point. It was a connection point for 5 years. And because then she stayed down there and worked. She met her eventual husband. And so those little connections, I think, without asking them to do a lot, means so much more to you. So, and then I'll share one more story, because I'm kind of reaching this point in my life where I'm starting to wind down, right? I've been doing corporate gender training now for 10 years. I've been on the road about 30 weeks a year. And I know we'll talk later about the progress that maybe has been made or hasn't been made and what's going on. And 3 years ago, my daughter gave birth to a granddaughter. And so I looked at her in the nursery and I said, oh my God, now I have to do this gender equity work for another 20 years to make sure that you have every opportunity in the world. So as much as I have thought about kind of winding down and scaling back on this a little and enjoying life, that she kind of drives me now, and she's 3 and she's adorable and she's the center of our world.
Well, yeah, you got a few more years ahead of you then in that work that you're going to be doing. Let's talk a little bit about that, because you have a company called YWomen, and I want you to tell me the story about this. And I know that there's longer pieces out there. You've got a TEDx talk and things about this, but having a daughter yourself and being in corporate America as you were, what was that point? What was that pivotal point where you said to yourself, I need to do more?
Yeah. What's really of interest is I ended up having to run a diversity education program. And this was a job I didn't want for a whole host of reasons. I got assigned to run this position. And it was kind of that really crappy training that you've seen on The Office, that bad corporate diversity training. It wasn't quite that bad, but it was pretty bad. But I tell a story that seems so commonplace today, but in 2003 it wasn't. And I had a friend of mine who I've known for years stand up, and he said, and he's a Black gentleman, and we were just sharing stories, and he said one of the lowest points of his life, he said, I'm a vice president at Coca-Cola, and I live in Columbus, Ohio. I live in a beautiful neighborhood, and I drive a white Jaguar. And at least once every 2 weeks, I'm pulled over on my way home for being nothing more than a Black man in a nice car in a nice neighborhood. And he says, you know how tired you are at the end of the day? And you go through a whole host of emotions, because this has happened to him all the time in his life. And he said one of the saddest days of his life was when he got pulled over and his 15-year-old son is sitting next to him. And he knew in that moment, all he could do was put his hands on the wheel and be as polite as possible, so that this behavior would be mirrored by his son when he got pulled over. And I have to tell you, that story changed me. I said, there is stuff going on here that I just don't understand. And so I didn't become an advocate at that point, but I started going and talking to people. And I talked to all my Black colleagues and said, is this common? They said, oh my God, yes. And then I talked to women. I said, what does this feel like? What does this sound like? And so between, that one epiphany moment and the next 10 years, I would come to learn that as long as men are 80% of senior leadership in most companies, and I do corporate work, we will never drive long-term advancement for women or other underrepresented groups without their active advocacy. And my gift is I'm an old white guy, and I can talk to them differently, and they hear things differently. I actually co-facilitate with a number of people, and it might be an African-American gentleman, it might be a white female, and we will say literally the same thing. And you know there's an unconscious bias in that leadership team that says, oh, he's playing the race card. Oh, she's playing the woman card. Wow, this Jeff guy, he really knows what he's talking about. And it's a complete unconscious bias on their side. And oh, by the way, I can say things to them that these other two individuals can't. And they just have to hear it from someone like themselves. And that's where, 10 years ago, I said, I'm going to focus on women because it's a gateway. Having done diversity training for 10 years, and it's now, especially today's age has borne this out. Most people aren't ready to have a conversation around race. But if I can get you to have a conversation around the fact that men and women are different and having different experiences, then you may feel comfortable going and talking to a Black colleague or a Hispanic colleague and just asking questions. And what I've found is you can literally go up to any person in an underrepresented group, and if you ask in a genuine manner, can you tell me about Black Lives Matter? What am I missing here? What don't I understand? And you will hear it first person from them. And I have found that you can ask literally any question. If you ask in a genuine manner, wanting to know their point of view, demonstrating empathy. And that's how you start this. All of my male engagement training, and I actually do a 7-hour day for 30 minutes at a time in corporate America to become better advocates at advancing women. But their very first homework assignment is to take a woman to coffee, or now virtual coffee, and ask her one question. What don't I understand about the experience you're having? And oh, by the way, she's not going to say anything. Most women don't want to be the flag bearer for all things women in their company. So I tell them, ask again, and don't interrupt her. Don't say, hey, we got a policy. You talk to so-and-so, just shut up and listen. And then ask a third time. And in that last 10 minutes, you get insights that you had no idea existed. You thought that the two of you were having equal experiences in the workplace, and you're not. And then with that kernel of knowledge, you can start to build your brain. And so a lot of my training is having men read McKinsey reports, Lean In reports, case studies, and then taking that back to their workplace. Because this is the other thing I found out. Men need data. I'm not justifying this behavior, but it helps us to make this connection back to the business, whether it's women as consumers, women as talent, driving more engagement, whatever. And so that's where the strategist part comes in to play for me. I make business connections around gender and race. So
it's really
long
interesting.
answer, but
no,
I
think it's really interesting. And you've been doing this now for a number of years, and I'm sure that you've seen some movement, but what kind of movement have you actually seen, and where are we at today versus where you started, and where do we still need to go?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. There was just and I'm drawing a blank, it might be Morgan Stanley, Merrill Lynch. Someone just did a massive gender equity study of the Fortune 500. And literally 300 of the Fortune 500 have shared their data and the attempts they want to make in the next 5 years to do more to promote women. So that includes accountability, reporting, transparency, things like that. So I think you've got a group that acknowledges the issue. I think if you look outside of those 300, you have 700, if we use the Russell 1000, who may or may not even have a clue. We don't know what to do. We don't know how to get started. And then you start to dissect that a little further, right? Out of that 300, I would say there's 100 companies that really, really get this. IBM, Sodexo, Marriott, the companies that are always winning awards for their advancement of women. And where are we on progress? That's where I get back to, I think 100 companies are doing it really well. I think there's 200 companies that are voicing an opportunity. I think you've got 700 companies who are running the gamut of do we get it or not? And that's just corporate America. Then you have to look societally and at all these other factors. But I'll tell you this much. I do work with these men, this full day session with 30 men. And I have now probably put close to 600 men through this program in the last 5 years. None of these guys is going to make a headline. They all want to be great leaders. They all want to be great managers, and they want to be supportive advocates for women. And it's sad, Me Too is not going away. And so there's going to be the Me Too knuckleheads who suck all the attention. And the guys I'm working with are never going to make a headline. And so we can say, has progress stalled? We're certainly at an interesting reflection point. And I think the answer is in 5 years. And the reason I say that is that's when the last of the baby boomers is going to retire. 10,000 baby boomers a day are leaving the workforce. It's actually accelerated a little with COVID, but the majority of them are older white men like myself. And new entries into the workforce are predominantly women, people of color, or millennials. And so the very representation in corporate America has to change just because there's no old white guys around anymore, right? And I think you're going to see the same true in politics, both city, local, federal. You're going to see it in associations and societal. But I think the world in 5 years looks significantly different. But the number one driver, I think, is just boomer retirements. And the smart companies are going to figure out, we got to keep our best and brightest, or they're going to be the next Sears or the next Circuit City.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that because I think that it is important. It's so important on the corporate level. Now, one of the things that I wanted to kind of ask you about is that you're working on a corporate side, and we have a lot of dads out there that are trying to advocate for their daughters, no matter what age they are. And they may work in a corporate environment. They might not.
Yep.
But they may want to take that next step to be able to advocate in a different way.
Yep.
From the work that you do, what are some things that dads, no matter what they do in life, what are some steps that they can take to take that next step to advocate for their daughters in this gender equity work?
Yep. And I'll tell you, the strategy is exactly the same as I use corporately. And it's a model called listen, learn, lead, and have the will. And so the listen part is that conversation I told you earlier about, have this with a woman. Learn is learning about the challenges and issues that women are facing today, especially their daughters. I'll give your listeners a absolutely terrifying book. And it was the book that Gretchen Carlsons wrote around the whole Fox situation. And I apologize, I'm drawing a blank on the name, but you can certainly look it up. But it talks about the statistics of sexual harassment and worse, sexual assault among college-aged women. And that college-aged women, I believe the number is almost 40% of college-age women will experience some kind of sexual harassment or sexual assault. And she gets into the high school numbers, and I don't recall those offhand. But if you're a father, if you don't think your daughter is going to face some type of harassment or assault, you're kidding yourself. So that's where you have to learn. And then the lead part is talking to other men. And this is really hard, right? This is the man code. I will tell you, when I shifted out of sales and marketing to doing work to advancing women, my peer of best friends, who, oh, by the way, are middle-aged white guys at that time, were like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this women's thing? And you just have the courage, you have to have the courage to say, look, I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for your daughter and for my daughter. And literally that one statement catches them so by surprise that it reframes their thinking. You've got to put it in a term that's for them. And so it's like, why you're going to go do this? You're doing it for your daughter. And sadly, this is, and I'm sure your listeners have talked about it a lot, and I'm not justifying it, but men rarely make the connection that if they're not advocating for women, they're actually hurting their daughter's future. And so you can't do it at home and then not do it at work. You can't be two separate people. And so, I think I introduced this, the last time we talked. If you go to my website, I actually have an initiative called the Father of Daughter Initiative. And you can download this and put your daughter's name on it and sign it. I also have an advocating for women, which women and men without daughters can have to sign for a woman. But just signing this and putting it in your office marks you as an advocate. Or how about this? How about you sign it and put it in your daughter's bedroom to say that I am going to watch out for you? And then maybe you encourage some other fathers to do this, right? And then you start to share this well-intended good behavior. So even though it's a corporate tool, I think it has a lot of applicability for the work you're doing.
Well, I really appreciate it. And as you were talking, I did look, and Gretchen Carlsons' book is Getting Real.
Thank you.
And I'll put a link in the notes so that everyone knows about that. But that is a powerful story, and I know that there are others. There's a book by Michelle Travis that just tells some amazing stories on the corporate side as well, called Dad's Four Daughters, and you're a part of that as well. And there's, some amazing fathers that just the fact of being fathers themselves made them take that next step to say, like you were saying, it's not even the pledge that you had, but it's just, I have a daughter and I'm seeing what my daughter is going through and I want to take that next step.
Well, and the thing I would point out in Gretchen's book, the first 3 full pages are names she's been called in her life in the news industry, mostly because she was a woman, and the advances that she looked at. And I will tell you, it is very raw and it is very real. And when you read that and you start to think about, oh my God, my daughter could be going through this. And then as a father, you got to ask yourself, would she feel comfortable telling me? Because especially younger girls or teenagers, are they going to tell their parents, hey, I'm being bullied. Hey, I'm being cyberbullied. Hey, this guy is doing this stuff to me at school and it doesn't feel comfortable. Because we went through this with my son, quite frankly, who was bullied. And he was bullied in middle school. We didn't find this out until he was in college. Never shared it with us because in his mind, we couldn't do anything about it. So he chose not to tell us. Well, what's going on in your daughter's life that she's choosing not to tell you about? Because she thinks you're only going to make it worse. So all you can do is keep open a line of communication. So.
That communication is so important, and I love the steps that you were talking about, and taking the woman out for coffee or virtual coffee in the environment that we're in, to be able to hear their stories. At Fathering Together, we're all about storytelling and making sure that the stories of fathers are told, because as you said, men are not always good about sharing their stories. They're not good about talking to other men and being able to talk with them about meaty topics, meaningful topics, and not just the game of the week. So it is important. It's so important for men to be able to come together to be able to, whether it's in regards to gender equity or just coming together to share their truths, that is just such a powerful thing that men can and should do, to be able to understand each other, but also to be able to support each other and not feel like they're having to go at being a father alone.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. So I want to say thank you. Thank you for all the work that you were doing. Now, I know that you said that, prior to your granddaughter being born, that you were kind of thinking, maybe it's time for me to scale back a little bit. Um, Talk to me about the next few years. And I'm sure you still got corporate clients and you're doing the corporate thing, but for you,
Yeah.
where is that light that you are trying to attain? Where's that light at the end of the tunnel? And what does that look like for you?
Yeah, it's funny. Part of this, part of a long time ago, I wrote my life mission statement, and it really still serves to guide me. And it's really pretty simple. And it says, I want to be a learner and teacher every day. And I have found that if I am doing both of those, I'm actually really, really happy. Right? People have misconceptions around retirement. Right? It's not about going sitting on a beach. You've got to stay engaged. You got to find things that move your heart. Um, I'll tell you one of the things I'm finding fascinating, and some work that I'm going to start to explore, because in my training, I tend to talk about gender in a binary sense, men and women. And what we're now, I'm going to say what we're now discovering, but it's been around for 50 years, longer, humanity, is the notion that gender is much more fluid. Gender non-binary, gender expression, and when you look at Gen Z, there's some interesting research from GLAD. 23% of Gen Z, so let's call those people under the age of 20, preferred gender in a non-binary context, and so that's where you start to think about, well, all this child raising that we've done to get better at kind of dispelling, sexist myths. Well, maybe it's actually coming to fruition. And how do we actually support and nurture that going forward? And there are so many, contingencies out of that. And it's not just sexual orientation. It's, birth gender, gender expression, and to me, that's the next evolution. When I talk about being a gender strategist or wanting gender equity, I'm still defining that in a binary term around women, and where I think I'm probably going to evolve in the next 2 to 3 years is a much more inclusive message. I'm still probably going to focus on gender as a gateway to race. I don't think we're still ready to have meaningful race conversations in this country. And so if you ask, I don't know if it's a light right now and a train coming, but it's certainly something I want to learn more about and see where this is coming from.
Well, I just say thank you. Thank you for the work that you're doing, for the mission that you're championing as well, because I think that it is so important in today's society. And for other men to see a man leading the charge, I think is important too, to be able to say that this is important, to be able to say that fathers need to take the stand and men need to take a stand, to be able to lift up and advocate for women in society today.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
Now, we always finish our interviews with what I like to call our Fatherhood 5, where we delve deeper into you as a dad. Are you ready?
All right.
So in one word, what is fatherhood?
Oh my gosh. um, Responsibility.
When was a time that you felt that you finally succeeded in being a father to a daughter?
Is there a time limit on that?
Oh,
I will tell you one of the proudest moments of my life was when my daughter got her master's degree. Uh, yeah, because I came from a poor farm family in Racine, Wisconsin, and I went to literally a one-room schoolhouse. And I believe everything that I was able to achieve in life was through education. And so literally, from the age of 3, I stress the value of education to my children. And it must have worked because both my kids have master's degrees. And so I just think it's something that is so important. And we can define education differently nowadays. It doesn't have to be a degree, but I would say that was probably my proudest moment.
now one of the questions that I typically ask is one that I think is a little bit, I want to ask it in a little bit different way.
All right.
Typically, I would say, how would you want your kids to describe you as a father? And I think that that's, even though your children are adults, I think there's still something there for you to say how you feel about that. But I think beyond that, and you can answer that too, but
Sure.
beyond that, talk to me about also the response that your daughter has given you to the work that you do.
Sure. And it's funny because my daughter's not in corporate America. She's an educator. And boy, you want to talk about its own world of gender issues going on. But certainly appreciative. Both my children acknowledge what I do and the work that I do. And so it's great having that rewarded. It's funny, my son is 30, right in the heart of that millennial, and he would tell me I'm not doing enough. So we have some interesting conversations around that. So that's what I would be. I would hope my children would say supportive. I would hope they would, if there was one word, I would hope it would be supportive.
Now, over the years and being a
Mhm.
father, who would you say either inspires you today or inspired you to be a better father?
Yeah, it's funny. That actually goes back. I can remember it vividly. When I was 12 years old, when you're on a dairy farm, everybody works really hard. And I can't recall a single time my dad took a break to play baseball with the boys or, even come to a school concert. Um, and I actually had some struggles with that, for a long time. And then I actually, my mom was passing and we were spending time together. My dad had died earlier. And I asked a question. I said, Mom, did Dad always want to be a farmer? And she said, your dad hated farming. He was the eldest son and it was his responsibility. And I'm just like, holy cows, could I have not heard this 50 years earlier? Because you wanted Ward Cleaver and you didn't get Ward Cleaver, right? Well, nobody got Ward Cleaver. So, when I was 12, the neighbor man invited me to come to Boy Scouts. They had, it was good family, good big family. They had 9 boys and 3 girls. And they had the 9 boys in a row. And so they were always the house everybody went to because the house was a disaster, right? The doors were off the hinges and everything else. And we had so much fun with them. And he invited me to come and join Boy Scouts. And it was life-changing for me. I would find focus. I'd become an Eagle Scout. It led me to wanting to travel and explore and learn. And just this single invitation and then getting responsibilities. And I know the Boy Scouts has really had some issues lately, but the skills that it taught me as a 15-year-old to be responsible for the 11-year-olds you're with stayed with me my whole life. So he was kind of the dad everybody wished they had. because you never had to clean your room.
And finally, what advice would you give to other dads?
Oh gosh. Just be patient. Just be patient. Boy, and it's the hardest thing to do, especially in the moment, right? Um, Bite your tongue, walk away, just take a deep breath. Um, um, I'm actually much more concerned about my granddaughter than I was my daughter. Life is so different today. My daughter's 35. It wasn't that long ago. The world has changed. And, it's funny we're having this podcast. My son is actually going to become a father in November. They haven't revealed a gender yet, so I don't know what that's going to be, but I'm excited. But you can just see when they talk about the future, the concern, and we joke, our friends around us who are kind of the same age around, boy, we had it so easy at the time. We thought it was so tough, and boy, raising kids today is so hard. And what's going to happen to make that easier? I don't know. I hope something happens, but we'll see where that goes. But the number one advice I would give is just patience. So.
Well, Jeffrey, I just want to say thank you for being here today. Now, if people
Absolutely.
want to find more about you, what you're doing, more about the pledge, where should they go?
Yeah, thanks for that. So my website is www.women.biz. And what I want to share with you right now for both your listeners and your corporate folks, on October 5th, I am launching 2 virtual learning modules. One is based on my keynote, YWomen, the Leadership Imperative to Advancing Women and Engaging Men. And it includes a self-assessment of a gender awareness profile that men can take to see how much of an advocate they are. And there's also a version for women. And it also includes a white paper on the 4 key actions to advance women now. It's about a 35-minute podcast. It includes discussion points and things, so it runs about an hour. It's free. Download it, share it with all your friends. And that's the best free gift I can give anybody, because it has one simple goal. I present some data, and then I want you to talk about it. And that's how we're going to start to drive gender conversations. And even though it's a corporate focus, it has so much applicability across other areas. So please pass that along. There's also a module that tells business resource groups how to write a strategic plan. Having done work with business resource groups for almost 20 years. Most are led by well-meaning volunteers, but they haven't really been taught how to write a strategic plan that's actually going to help the company. They'll have a lot of programs. They'll have a lot of initiatives. This helps them write a plan. And again, it's free. You can download it on my website.
Well, thank you so much, Jeffrey. I just want to say this has been great. I have really appreciated you being here and all the information that you've shared. And I wish you all the best.
All right. My pleasure. Thank you for having me on.